Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Mailbox for the 20th of December 2011. My name is Totalbiscuit, bringing you your daily dose of community interaction, gaming discussion, and all that good stuff. You can email in mailbox at cynicalbrit.com, as mailbox at cynicalbrit.com, with topics for future shows. First email comes in from Peter that says, looking at the other forms of media such as books and movies, we see that they last a whole lot longer than video games. For example, people still buy and watch movies like Casablanca and read books like Lord of the Rings. However, when it comes to video games, they're lucky if they last longer than 5 years. Personally, I think this is because of game technology rapidly increasing since video games first came around. If this is so, when do you think that video game tech will plateau, if ever? And why else do you think video games don't stick around as long as books and movies? I don't know if I agree with that attitude, honestly. I think that there are plenty of games that actually do stick around for a long time. An example would be Super Mario. People still play that. Sonic, the original Sonic games, people play those too. The original Final Fantasies, they play those as well. The list goes on and on. The thing is that you can take that example for books as well and say, oh, well, people still read Lord of the Rings. Okay, well, how many other books from that era are still read? Not all that many, honestly. Yes, there are books that have been read for a very long time. The Bible is an obvious example. That's been read for over 1,000 years. But a lot of books from that era, they aren't read at all. They're not really read by anyone in particular. Lord of the Rings is kind of like a timeless classic, but I would also say that Super Mario is a timeless classic. The original Super Mario Brothers, and we can have a look at other games, as I say, like Sonic. That is timeless, and those games are often subject to re-releases as well. That's something to consider, but there are other points that you need to think about. The thing is, playing the original Super Mario on the original system is a bit difficult these days because those systems aren't sold. Sure, you can get an emulated version, or you can buy one of the third-party systems that's designed to be an NES. I mean, for instance, there's actually a portable SNES right now. It's called the Superboy or something like that, and you can actually plug a cartridge into that thing, and it's got the appropriate ports to plug two controllers in as well. It's quite a nice little bit of kit. And of course, it takes the original cartridges, but you're talking about acquiring those cartridges as well. Those cartridges aren't produced anymore. You can get an emulated version, as I said before, but that's really like a reissue, as far as I'm concerned, for, say, Lord of the Rings. I mean, how many editions of Lord of the Rings are there? There's tons of different editions of Lord of the Rings. I own several myself. Some of them are really, really nicely put together. Some of them not so much. And those will continue to be released, I would imagine, over and over again. They'll be reissued because people continue to buy them, but so many other books from that era are pretty much obsolete. Some can't even be obtained anymore. Some are reissued, but nobody actually reads them. So, as regards to technology, you could also talk about the idea that games are reliant on the tech and the game mechanics that are actually in place at the time. And that tech and those game mechanics, to some degree, not always, but to some degree, do advance. And they leave the old tech behind and the old game mechanics and ideas behind, and you can't really play those games anymore without getting really frustrated. I mean, there's a lot of really stupidly hard platformers that are not so enjoyable anymore. It's acceptable back in the day because they were designed for arcades, but these days, there's a lot of mechanics that people would say, well, you know, why is there not a save checkpoint here? Why do you have to use passwords to reload a level? Why do you have lives that you then run out of and then you've got to start the whole game again? That's not really all that acceptable in today's game market. And a lot of people will not enjoy that as much as they would have enjoyed it 20 or 30 years ago. That's certainly something to consider. When it comes to graphics, the comparison is obvious, and you'll note that a lot of the games that have survived and continue to be popular to this day have something of a timeless art style, and Sonic is a good example. Sonic still looks good today. Why? Because of its art style. It's not because it's graphically advanced. It is not a graphically advanced game, but the fact of the matter is the art style suits the game down to a T. It's a very clear, very colorful, very distinct art style, is instantly recognizable to this day. Mario as well. I'd say more the SNES versions than the NES. I mean, the NES versions are kind of ugly these days. The SNES versions look much, much better, but the example still stands. There are other games that kind of suffer in that regard. For instance, the original Final Fantasy games really do not look good today. The art style is difficult to deal with, and as a result, they've been remade quite a bit and released on different platforms. But if you look like something like Chrono Trigger, then Chrono Trigger remains popular, and there haven't really been all that many additions made to the art style there. Sure, there was the DS version, which did polish it up somewhat, but the fact of the matter is the art style has remained primarily the same, right? Because it was a SNES game with a very distinct graphic style once again. And then you've got other games that suffer way, way more than, say, a SNES game would. PlayStation 1 and Saturn games. I think that's the generation that suffers the most, because that was the early 3D console games that look absolutely awful by today's standards. Really bad. As in, they look worse than Sonic the Hedgehog. Why? Because the 3D art style isn't an aesthetic per se. It's not a good aesthetic at any rate. It's just a limitation of technology, and it looks really ugly by today's standards. Try playing Tomb Raider 1. Don't tell me that is not an ugly game, and that was one of the best-looking games of its time. I find it really hard to play PlayStation and Saturn games that are in 3D. Any 3D polygon game from that era is very difficult to play, in my opinion. Any sprite-based game, no problem. Definitely play that. There are tons of timeless fighting games. People still play Super Street Fighter 2, etc., and those games do have something of a timeless quality to them. But I don't really think your argument's all that valid, honestly. I feel that there are plenty of games that do fulfill your requirements, and I think you're ignoring that an awful lot of books and movies from that era are not watched. They are not watched at all. They are consigned to the archives. Nobody watches them, and only the classics remain, which is exactly the same with gaming as well, even across a shorter time period. This email comes in from Ellis that says, while not being my favourite game dev studio, BioWare has always held a place near and dear to my heart. In fact, one of the first games I had ever played was Baldur's Gate. However, it seems the quality of BioWare titles is slowly dropping. For example, Dragon Age 2, while not awful, was certainly not a groundbreaking or even great game by any means. This brings up the question, is there a reason for this slipping quality from fantastic games like Baldur's Gate, Knights of the Old Republic, Jade Empire, and the first Mass Effect? One reason that comes to mind is the idea that EA may be overworking BioWare to an extent, in that the main BioWare studio in Edmonton is simultaneously working on Mass Effect 3 and more than likely Dragon Age 3 as well. Of course, resources also have to be diverted to BioWare Austin and BioWare Victory for the Old Republic, and Command & Conquer Generals 2 respectively. And EA cannot give away unlimited funds. The other theory is that BioWare is getting drunk on power in a sense, as it is a possibility that they believe their games are expected to win awards simply because they are BioWare games. I would hope that they are not getting this lazy, but BioWare is slowly losing my support and the support of many others more than likely, since I would rather play a high-quality product than a subpar one that needs to be padded out with DLC and other ilk. As a broke university student, it's much more beneficial for my wallet to buy just games as DLC is, in a way, superfluous. Unfortunately, modern BioWare loves to pad out their games with DLC as the main games are not as substantial as those of old BioWare. Of course, DB, I would like to ask your opinion on this and maybe add in a theory of your own, as I am sure that I am not the only one that feels betrayed by BioWare. I think being betrayed by BioWare is a little bit extreme, don't you think? Baldur's Gate was a product of its time. That's something that you have to really understand. And I'm honestly not noticing this drop of quality you're talking about here. The only drop of quality that I've seen that's been noticeable is Dragon Age 2. Like, Dragon Age 2 was actually a bad game in my opinion, and I've given a lot of reasons as to why I hate Dragon Age 2. Including, for instance, the fact that the combat mechanics are an absolute joke. Ooh, we made it more actiony. No, you didn't. And it's like, ooh, you could press buttons to do things. There's still plenty of auto-attacking going on. It's auto-attack and then press a cooldown every once in a while. And the amount of cooldowns actually makes resource management absolutely unnecessary. We can talk about the idea that enemies randomly spawn into fights, so there's no planning allowed in that particular game. We can talk about how completely unbalanced the difficulty levels are. There's all sorts of problems with Dragon Age. The amount of reused scenery and reused areas, the fact that there's only one city, the fact that none of the characters are memorable. There's plenty of problems with Dragon Age 2. That was a bad game, in my opinion. That was the worst game that BioWare has brought out since Sonic Chronicles. And I would actually go as far as to say that Sonic Chronicles was better. And that wasn't even a good game. That was a 2008 RPG. And why the hell would you make a Sonic RPG anyway? I don't even know. But aside from that, I mean, are you saying that Jade Empire was a better game than Mass Effect 2? I would disagree. Or even the original Mass Effect. I'd disagree with that as well. I wouldn't say that. I mean, I like Jade Empire, don't get me wrong, but Mass Effect was a great game. Is Knights of the Old Republic a better game than Mass Effect? You can't make the comparison. Honestly, you just can't make the comparison. They are different games. You'll notice the evolution of the BioWare games through from Baldur's Gate. I mean, we'll ignore Shattered Steel for the moment and have a look at Baldur's Gate and then the other games that they made. So they made Baldur's Gate and the expansion. They then made MDK 2, which was a complete departure. It was actually a very good game, I might add. MDK was an absolutely stellar shooter. Very much a fan of MDK 2. Baldur's Gate 2, Baldur's Gate 2 Throne of Baal, Neverwinter Nights and its expansions, and then Star Wars The Old Republic. You can see that they're evolving a certain kind of RPG there. And then with Jade Empire, they take it down a more actiony route. And in fact, I'd say the Knights of the Old Republic was a little bit more actiony, just in the way that the combat worked. And then, of course, they developed that into Mass Effect 2 years later. And these games are going down a more actiony route that is focused on storytelling in a specific fashion. Mostly character choice and voice acting. Now, is it lazy to produce a shorter game than Baldur's Gate? I would argue that you can make a longer game with less resources when you make it like Baldur's Gate, because you don't have any voice acting, you can reuse a lot of textures and things like that, and you can code quests a lot easier. There's less actively going on in the world is more static, and the programming is simpler. Also, you don't have the production values that would force you to spend an awful lot of money on developing the title. The thing is that I think people do actually want games like Baldur's Gate again. I think so. I think that's probably why Dragon Age Origins was so popular. I loved that. I think that's one of the best games they've ever made. It was a wonderful title. It was one of my favorite RPGs on the PC of all time, and that's saying an awful lot. And indeed, that was actually described as a spiritual successor to Baldur's Gate. Dragon Age 2, well, that wasn't so much a spiritual successor. I'm not even going to talk about that, but I think people would like to see more Baldur's Gate-style games. But do I notice a drop in quality? No, I notice a change in direction. I would like to see Baldur's Gate 3. I would love to see Baldur's Gate 3. I would love to see another Neverwinter Nights game or whatever, just something based on D&D, or indeed in its own universe. The thing is, Dragon Age was a perfect opportunity to do that. The Dragon Age universe is cool. Dragon Age 2 was a disaster piece. If they make Dragon Age 3 better and go back to the older style, then that's great. But certainly something that BioWare, I think, needs to consider is that people do want the more classic style of RPG, and they'll probably pay for it. And honestly, I don't even see you needing to spend an awful lot of money on it. Sure, throw some voice acting in, definitely, but use the old style, use an isometric style, and I think people would definitely enjoy it. Do I notice this drop in quality, though? No. I think a lot of people are mistaking a drop in quality for a change of direction. I don't see The Old Republic as being a low-quality game. I see it as being an MMO, and that offends a lot of people. People don't necessarily like MMOs. I don't really blame them for that. MMOs have a lot of bad qualities to them, but unfortunately, that's just the way that things go. This email comes in from Sarnius that says, let's watch a very informative video from the Gun Shop. That is the Guns for Hire channel, by the way. That's his vlog channel. Very good vlog channel, I might add. I have nothing but respect for Guns for Hire. He's an absolutely fantastic guy. In fact, I'd love to get him on a podcast at some point. I think we could have a great discussion. Anyway, he brought out what I think is an interesting thought. He claimed first-person shooters are dying, and although this is very early to tell, the basis of what he was trying to say is nothing new, nothing to evolve the genre or move it forward. Whatever you do to the game, the mechanics will always be the same. This really made me think, and to be honest, I have to agree with them. No matter how different an FPS is these days, it's the same thing, the same mechanics. When you strip it to the core, it's exactly that. Also, that FPS would die with that refresh in the genre. What we're looking for is a new COD 4, something that will breathe life into the genre. Call of Duty 4 did exactly that, if not changed FPS gaming forever. So all in all, what do you think is next for FPS? Do you think there will be a rebirth in the genre? What do you think is best for it? And what do you think is needed for that COD 4 again? Do you think games like Halo 4, Star Wars, Battlefront 3, or Firefall will achieve just that? Or do you think it will always be the same thing but with an upgraded engine and better graphics? Also, I'll just add this in. Do you think an FPS world or FPS MMO like PlanetSide 2 or Firefall is the way to go? I mean, his point is valid, certainly to an extent, in that if you strip it down to the very core mechanics, an FPS is always going to be about shooting guys. Unfortunately, you can then apply that to pretty much any genre you can imagine. A puzzle game is essentially about solving puzzles. A point-and-click game is essentially about pointing and clicking. A racing game is essentially about racing around a track, and we get that. We get that idea. The thing is that that's what defines a genre. That's what makes it a genre. If you take those elements out, then you don't even have a game genre. The game genre has to be defined by something, and it's going to be that core linchpin of an idea, the mechanics that are based around said idea that define the genre. Now, you can tweak the mechanics. You can do an awful lot with the mechanics. You can twist them around, you can change them about. But yeah, of course, you're going to get back to the same thing over and over again. And honestly, I think that you're going to see a very cyclical thing with FPS. You're going to see them falling in and out of favor, as we've seen before from the genre. We're going to see them going back to older school mechanics, then back to new school mechanics. Will we see an evolution anywhere? I don't even see what that evolution could possibly be, honestly. I really, really don't. Going large is an idea of that being an evolution, but the thing is that's already happened. And we saw PlanetSide, and we've seen Mag as well. They didn't really evolve the genre all that much, and they certainly didn't push it in a particular direction. We're going to see PlanetSide 2 again, and I don't even know if that's a good way to go for it. Don't get me wrong, I love PlanetSide. I'm so psyched for PlanetSide 2. And aside from Guild Wars 2, it is the one MMO that I'm looking forward to playing the crap out of in 2012, assuming that it actually gets out in that time. PlanetSide was a great time for me. I had an amazing experience there. The problem I'm seeing with larger scale FPS at the moment, and anyone that's played on a 64-player Battlefield 3 server will probably agree with me here, is that your individual actions don't necessarily matter all that much, and taking that control away from people does actually cause them to get a bit uncomfortable, and they don't really enjoy the game as much if they don't feel that they're the ones making the difference. Now, in PlanetSide, you can do it as part of a group, but you certainly can't do it on your own. You really, really can't. There was, I think, one exception whereby you could make the difference if you happened to be an infiltrator, but that's only if the enemy team wasn't really paying attention. If you could stealth through and hack a console and disable a bunch of things, then yeah, that's great. Or you could get into a spawning room, which is what I love to do. Get into the spawning room, hack a console, and then spawn in a max suit, and then gun down everyone that came out of it. Basically spawn camping, which is encouraged in PlanetSide, I might add. That was a very, very valid tactic indeed, and it pretty much had to be done in order to win the game. But that was okay, because you could always spawn somewhere else anyway, so it didn't really matter. Whatever the case, I don't know where this evolution is going to come from. I'd have to agree with Guns. I don't know where this evolution is going to come from. What I would disagree with is the fact that he believes that the setting is not restricting the genre. I think the setting is absolutely restricting the genre. MMS, modern military shooters, can only go down one specific way because they are tied to pseudo-reality. And I say pseudo because it's not tied to realism. It certainly isn't. Those games are not realistic. But they are tied to the limitations of what you can do in real life to a certain degree. Guns are going to handle in a fairly similar manner. Obviously in COD, your realistic guns, quote-unquote, don't handle anywhere near like they would in real life, but they've still got to follow the same basic rules. An MP5 doesn't shoot a plasma bolt, regardless of what you do there. So you do have limitations imposed on the mechanics and the flexibility of the title by its setting. I think if you take it out of that setting, then yes, you can do an awful lot more with it. Admittedly, that new setting might have its own problems, for instance. I think, to be honest, all we really need to get away from is the FPS that centers around being fed candy. And the reason I say being fed candy is that a game like Call of Duty drip feeds you rewards to keep you playing. And those rewards become the sole objective of playing, not the actual enjoyment of the game. We need to stop that. The term grinding. Oh, I'm grinding for this level. No, that's not what grinding is. You should be enjoying the game for what it is. And these rewards should certainly help you towards your goal, but they shouldn't be the goal. They should help you enjoy the game. They shouldn't be the only reason that you're enjoying it. Yes, I get the idea that working towards rewards is a great way of keeping you playing, but the problem is, for some people, it becomes the only reason. That has got to go. It really, really does. That must go, because it's taking away the idea of a complex, well-rounded, deep shooter with a good skill curve, with a high skill ceiling. It's taking that idea away and replacing it with, well, it doesn't really matter how the mechanics are because you're going to play it anyway because you want those level ups, you want the rewards. That needs to stop. It's damaging the genre as a whole. Okay, folks, before I go, I'd like to remind you that we are competing in the King of the Web contest in order to donate the entire prize to charity. $7,500 is the prize for King of the Web. That will fund a clean water project in a third world country. So we're going to do that. We're going to try and save a village. Sounds like a great thing to do for Christmas. So if you could help us out with that, that'd be great. tinyurl.com/vote Totalbiscuit is the place to go for that. You can vote 10 times per day. You get 10 voting tokens to spend. Please help us win that. It would mean a great deal to everyone to be able to give that great charitable gift for Christmas. That will be absolutely stellar. Thanks a lot, guys. I'll see you next time.